Good evening. Welcome to the Bradford County Historical Society. We're going to begin, and thank you for coming this evening for Friday night at the museum. Just a few announcements as usual. The museum is open Wednesday through Friday 10 to 4 and the first Saturday of the month. And it happens to be our speaker this evening is also the person who would give you the tour. So if you're impressed tonight, you can come hear more stories from Tom on regular hours. So also remember our research library is open upstairs along with our museum. So that we have people that research all the time there, and we welcome you to come and use that resource as well. Our program tonight is Bradford County Silent and Talkie Film History. So Tom we call the educator around here. That's actually his title because he does more than just give tours. He does programs and all kinds of other educational things. So we were looking for a program this year, and this was a topic he was interested in. So we're going to turn it over to him at this time.
So it's spelled E-D-U-C-A-T-O-R, but it's pronounced Jack of all trades, master of none. So good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. I have a lengthy, but it'll move smoothly once we get started, PowerPoint full of pictures and other information. I'm going to talk about how motion pictures began and how technology improved over time and took us through the silent film era into the talking film era. I'm going to talk a little bit about a studio that was located in Pennsylvania. I'm going to talk about the films that were filmed here in Bradford County, and I'm going to wrap up with talking about our actors and actresses and producers and directors that all basically came from Bradford County. And there's a lot more than I even knew about. And I got a call yesterday at 3:55 p.m., a gentleman from Vermont who couldn't come and wanted to know if he could watch it on live stream. And he said, well, do you have my great uncle Paul Felton in your presentation? And I said, never heard of him. Well, he was from Towanda, and he became a cartoon animator and director of cartoon films. So guess what I did this morning? Research. So I hope you learned some things, and I hope you're entertained, and I hope I don't stumble through my script, no pun intended. Too bad. So we'll talk about the elements and the beginnings to start. Technology of silent films was invented around 1860, but remained a novelty until around 1880 or 1890, give or take, when films on a single reel became easy to produce. The silent film era was an influence on the decades of cinema that came after, but silent films are also valuable independent of sound films. And remember that, they're valuable now. You'll hear something later that talks about that. So film production mostly evolved from the magic lantern shows in which images from hand-painted glass were projected on a wall or a screen, and then after the advent of photography, they included photos into the slideshows, basically, that they showed. Oh, that's not the right one. Yeah, that was the first one, sorry. And this is the technology that they used. It was called a magic lantern. It was also referred to as a stereopticon show. And we actually have one of those upstairs on the second floor of the museum. And it's not very big, but that one in the picture isn't very big either. But we do have one. They were narrated, projected images, and sometimes they had live music along with the slideshows. They were incredibly popular about 150 years ago. And again, we have one upstairs. And then we moved into movement of some kind, and this is a picture of one of several slides I have. The development of stroboscopic animation was well known since the introduction of the phenakistic scope. trust me, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. Phonetistic scope in 1833. It was a popular optical toy. The scope was first widespread animation device that created a fluent illusion of motion. The scope is regarded as one of the first forms of media entertainment that paved the way for future motion pictures and film industry. The scope usually came in the form of a spinning cardboard disc attached to a vertical handle and arrayed around the disc center in a series of pictures showing a sequential phase of animation. The scope could only show short continuous loops and small rectangular or circular openings accompanied the scope itself, and then you could replace different discs on the handheld part of the scope. So a person would spin the disc and look through the moving slits at the images reflected in a mirror. The scanning of the slits across a reflective surface kept them from simply blurring together so that the user could see a rapid succession of images that appeared to be a single moving picture. So that's where we brought motion into the concept. Oh, wrong one. In 1878, there was a debate. Do horses' hoofs touch the ground? Is there always one hoof on the ground while the horse is galloping? So somebody challenged Edward Maybridge to photograph a running horse. So he set up a series of automatic tripped cameras to film a horse being ridden by a jockey. They were cabinet cards, including 6 cards that each showed a sequence series of 6 to 12 automatic electro photographs depicting the motion of the horse. The series of photographs were shown on a spinning wheel to small audiences, and eventually the spinning disc was filmed. Now slide shows that somebody hand cranked the disc with all the pictures mounted on it, and there must have been some kind of viewing apparatus at the very top that people would concentrate their eyesight on. And unfortunately, I can watch it upstairs, the running horse. But this laptop doesn't connect to the internet, so I can't run a URL video from the internet. But that was supposed to show you the running horse sequence. And it was the first film that we know of that was recorded. So silent films, silent films were works of art specifically crafted for the lack of sound in mind. So if you think about any time you've seen a silent film, you would see overplayed expressions on people's faces and movements were exaggerated and whatnot. And that was obviously because sound didn't exist. But they did use intertitle cards to pass along narrative, scripts from the actors. And again, I kind of covered this already, excuse me. Though silent films convey narrative and emotional visually, various plot elements or key lines of dialogue may, when necessary, be conveyed using intertitle cards. The term silent film is a misnomer, as these films are almost always accompanied by live sounds. During the silent film era that existed from the mid-1890s to the late 1920s, a pianist, a theater organist, or in larger cities, sometimes an orchestra, accompanied the silent film, and they had a composition of music to follow as the film played out. So we have a movie buff camera expert sitting in the back of the room, and we were talking a little bit earlier. But technology improved, and this is a picture of a hand-cranked camera, and projection speeds varied depending on the year or the studio that was making the film. Most silent films were shot at a variable speed anywhere between 12 and 40 feet per second. Unless carefully shown at the intended speed, silent films can appear to be used unnaturally slow or unnaturally fast based on how fast the projector artist cameraman, not cameraman, the projectionist is cranking. Some scenes were intentionally under-cranked during filming and then cranked at the regular speed during the shows, which showed speeded up and exaggerated movements, a lot of times in the comedy silent films, like the Keystone Cops. They would show things that would happen really quick, and that's because they slowed the cranking down during the filming process. Then I think we've all heard of Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was keen on developing a film system that would operate synchronized with his phonograph. However, that never really took hold. He eventually introduced the kinetoscope as a silent motion film viewer in 1893. The kinetoscope is early motion film picture device designed for films to be viewed by one person at a time through a peephole viewer window. It created the illusion of movement by conveying a strip of perforated film bearing sequential images over a light source with a high-speed shutter. So a person would obviously, from that first slide, stand there looking down, and they'd either crank it by hand or it was motorized to run automatically. And I remember being on the boardwalk down at Ocean City, New Jersey as a child, going into some older shops, and they had some of these machines, and you dropped a nickel in, and you got to watch about a 1-minute movie of something that was filmed back in the late 1800s. So, synchronized dialogue and later music soundtracks became practical with perfection, and the audio amplifier tube and the advent of the Vitaphone system were developed. Within a decade, the widespread production of silent films for entertainment had ceased, and the industry had moved fully into the sound era, in which movies were accompanied by synchronized sounds, recordings of spoken dialogue, music, and sound effects. And later we're going to talk about certain actors that appeared in many silent films, but they never got into talkie films. Anybody know why? Their voices didn't meet the standard that Hollywood was looking for, so their careers ended. Yeah. So, whoops. Sorry, sorry, my bad. So, the early sound films, starting with The Jazz Singer in 1927, were referred to as talkies. The Jazz Singer is an American musical drama produced by Warner Brothers Pictures. It was the first full-length feature film with both recorded music and lip synchronization for lip singing and speech. Now, there were some movies filmed before this, but they didn't incorporate both lip syncing dialogue and music. This was the first movie to do so. Then the Vitaphone was invented. Synchronized dialogue and later musical soundtracks became practical with perfection of the audio amplifier tube and the advent of the Vitaphone. Within a decade, the widespread production of silent films for the entertainment had ceased, and the industry had moved fully into the sound era, in which movies were accompanied by synchronized sound recordings, spoken dialogue, music, and sound effects. And when this switch was made, Hollywood didn't consider silent films to be of any value anymore. So they disappeared. There's only a small amount of silent films that were saved. And then you can obviously watch some of them on YouTube or watch some of them on the internet, but most of them are long gone. Early studios. Where did the early studios start in America? Anybody know? Where? Anybody? The New Jersey area. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. The New York City area, as well as Fort Lee, New Jersey. In December 1908, Thomas Edison led the formation of the Motion Picture Patents Company that consolidated 10 film studios. Nicknamed the Edison Trust Company, it dominated the film industry through its distribution of films through the General Film Company. This company dominated the industry and was one of the contributing factors as to why studios left New Jersey and New York and moved to California. Fort Lee, New Jersey was the home of some of America's first motion pictures industry, including Universal Studios and Centaur Films, and many early films were shot at studios and locations in and around Fort Lee, New Jersey. The Centaur Film Company was the first independent movie studio in the United States constructed again in Fort Lee, New Jersey in 1909. But just as Fort Lee production facilities were gaining strength, Centaur Films relocated to California and became the Nestor Motion Picture Company, building its first studio in Hollywood, California in 1911. Nestor Films later merged with Universal Pictures. The other factors that involved the movement out west was the East Coast winters, which shut down production during winter months due to lack of sunshine, cold temperatures, and snow. Independent filmmakers considered the climate, environment, and lower cost of living in Southern California, which led to the eventual shift of virtually all filmmaking to the West Coast by the late 1930s. And here are some of the major studios that moved as well as merged and evolved. And of course, they're Universal, Paramount Studios in 1912, Universal Studios in 1912, Warner Brothers in 1923, Walt Disney Pictures in 1923, and MGM in 1924. So they didn't all go at once, but they evolved out there over the course of time. Except we had one very large movie studio in Pennsylvania. So I want to take a couple minutes and talk to you about the Lubin Film Company as well as the Bettswood, with the Z, Bettswood Film Company. The Lubin Film Company operated from 1912 to 1918, utilizing a string of 19th century buildings which brewer John F. Betts had built along the Pennsylvania Railroad that ran through his estate in Montgomery County. Sigmund Lubin purchased the property and started the studio and repurposed all the buildings on the property into the film industry. The Betts, I'm sorry, I forgot a slide on my notes. So there's a bulletin from the Lubin Film Company. The Betts mansion, which was located on the estate, was transformed into their first studio outside of Philadelphia. They had an earlier studio in Philadelphia, and they kept that studio going along with the things out in Montgomery County. Bettswood Studios purchased Lubin Films in 1918 and operated until 1924. Bettswood Studios became one of the largest studios in the world and was located in downtown Philadelphia and Valley Forge. So if you go down to Montgomery County and you're going to visit Valley Forge, very close to Valley Forge was the site of the Bettswood movie studios and complex. Having both an electric and daylight studio, as well as its own power plant, processing laboratory, and 350-acre studio complex, it was world famous as the largest and most advanced studio of its time. And they refer to it now as the Hollywood at the time that they were in existence. So in this picture, you can see some of the buildings that became the Bettswood Studios. The house here on the left, that became the office building with direct phone lines into the offices and studio in Philadelphia. The next building contained the power plant for the studio, and the next structure held the cafeteria where employees of the studio got free hot lunches every day. A bit further to the right, in this building, this is the film processing building right here. Excuse me. The largest building on the studio grounds was the film processing plant. It had a capacity for nearly 5 million feet of finished film per week. It was fully air-conditioned, and each stage of developing and printing processes required different conditions. Each room had separate temperature and humidity settings. And the last building in this photograph over here was the scenery storage on the upper levels, and on the lower levels were the stables for the cowboys' horses, because Betswood filmed a lot of Westerns, including part of the 350 acres was landscaped to make what they considered a Western landscape for filming their outdoor scenes. And both the stables and the processing plant stand today, although they've been repurposed into apartments and condominiums. But they're still there. And the Betswood Mansion stood on the hill above this area, but you can't see the mansion in this picture because a steam locomotive with the Pennsylvania Railroad went through right when they were taking that picture, which comes into play in a few more minutes. In front of the mansion and those other buildings, a short distance away, was the daylight and the dark studio. Excuse me. The enclosed glass house, that's this building right here, it was basically all glass and faced south to get the southern exposure to the sun to allow as much light as possible into the filming studio area. And here you see an internal photo of them filming something. And there's another one. And there's another one. They were all filmed in the glass house because they had room to spread scenery out and props and a lot of light to film by. Next to the glass house was the dark house, which would be this building right here, which had absolutely no windows. It was totally dark. Actually, there were two dark studios, excuse me. Both of these were dark studios with no windows. They used banks of Cooper, Hewitt, and Klieg lights to allow them to control the lighting scenes that they were working on with whatever scene in the movie. So the studio took up a lot of energy. So Betswood converted the boathouse that was on the estate, right on the bank of the Schuylkill River, into its own power plant. Water from the Schuylkill River was diverted to spin the turbine located under the boathouse, and then one of those other buildings in that list of buildings was where all the power went into, and then they controlled it from there to spread out to the rest of the studio. There were 4 fireproof vaults located on the grounds. 2 of them are here in the picture. And they were located away from the studio buildings. Anybody want to guess why? Because the film was very volatile and could burn, explode, whatever. So they were kept in a safe place, far away from everything, because they stored both finished and unfinished nitric films. This is my favorite part. The first films were filmed on a set in the village of Port Kennedy. Directors would hang saloon and sheriff signs on existing buildings. And they would start shooting, literally shooting scenes and gunfights without bothering to notify the residents of Port Kennedy. So what do you think the residents of Port Kennedy had to say about Betswood Studios? They weren't very happy. So they eventually built their own studio, or what's the word I'm looking for? Set. Thank you. And all these buildings could be taken apart, moved, and the facades could be changed from building to building to set up different towns for different movies that they were filming. While filming Westerns, the studio also took advantage of the Pennsylvania Railroad. which again passed through the grounds of the studio. Passengers would look out the windows to see tribes of Western Indians riding their ponies, racing towards the train, firing their rifles in the air. Conductors would wire ahead to the Philadelphia station master, advising them they would be late due to another attack by the Western Indians. And I read somewhere, but didn't include in the script, that sometimes they would flag the train down and have them back up so they could reshoot a scene. And that's when the conductors would take the time to get a message to Philadelphia that they'd be late. And all other than the existing buildings that have been repurposed, there stands a historical marker on the site of the studio. And again, it's very close to Valley Forge. So yesterday, a thought crossed my mind. When did popcorn become the staple snack to have at movie theaters? Yeah, my mind just bounces all around. So between 1920 and 1930, an individual wave of 20,000 movie theaters opened across America, with attendance reaching 25 million people weekly in 1925. That's a lot of people going to the movies. So street vendors caught onto this and moved their carts, whatever they were selling, to the area where the movie theaters were, including popcorn vendors. Theater owners, excuse me, there's one more there. Theater owners had installed lush carpeting to emulate the lush lobbies of bigger movie theaters. In an effort to avoid sticky, greasy spills, most theaters banned all snacks and drinks. But they quickly overturned that ban because by 1930, there were 90 million people a week going to see a movie. 1930. To me, that's like a huge number of people in 1 week during the age of what? The Depression, basically. So the theaters quickly, obviously, installed their own snack areas and popcorn machines and soda machines and whatnot that we see today, charging way too much money. So Bradford County's beginnings. The rural setting of Bradford County made it an attractive place for location scouts during the era of silent films. Easy access by railroad from New York City made the county ideal for the film industry. 2 silent films were made in Bradford County by major film studios in the early 1900s. The Heart of Jennifer, produced by Famous Players Film Company, was released in 1915 and was filmed in Lakewind, not Luckwind, Lakewind. Son of the Hills, produced by Vitagraph Studio, was also filmed in 1915 in Canton, in and around Canton. Other local films were Twanda's Queen, made by filmmaker Don Newland in 1934, which was a talkie, and filmed in Towanda, and Stampede, made by local resident and publisher of the Wyalusing Rocket, Bill Keeler, in the mid-50s, and was filmed in Wyalusing. So we're going to talk about each one of those individually. The Heart of Jennifer starred the artistic and beautiful Hazel Dawn, born March 23, 1890 in Ogden, Utah. Hazel Dawn was an American stage and film actress and a violinist. Dawn rose to fame as the title character in Ivan Carlyle's The Pink Lady, which opened on Broadway in 1911 and ran for 300 performances. She began work in film in 1914 and appearing in a total of 13 films. Dawn once was the mascot for both the United States Military Academy and the U.S. Naval Academy. After one West Point appearance, cadets tossed their hats onto the stage in admiration of her performance. And one of those caps at one performance belonged to Dwight D. Eisenhower. And we know what happened to him. A Son of the Hills. A Son of the Hills was directed by Harry Davenport, which we'll get into him in a little bit. The 5-part Blue Ribbon feature was based on the widely read novel of the same title by Harriet T. Comstock. The film starred Belle Bruce, who was born on July 19, 1898, in Boston, Massachusetts, and Antonio Moreno, who was born on September 26, 1887, in Spain. Belle Bruce starred in 24 movies between 1915 and 1919. Antonio Moreno began acting on stage in 1910. Oh, yeah, sorry, I bounced one head. Antonio Moreno started in 1910. Moreno made his screen debut in 1920, appearing in 147 films, including Creature of the Black Lagoon, and directed 4 other films, and retired in 1958. Now, when I found this picture, I recognized him. And some movies, there's something that I've seen when I was younger. So he was here in Bradford County for a while. Towanda, Queens, produced by Consolidated Film Producers of Los Angeles, California, had a local cast which included Howard Bailey, Lang Dalton, Harry Ann White, Richard Wilt, Joanna Gaylord, and William Glenn. The Daily Review printed, "The whole town is talking about it, it's a riot." And they also wrote, "Everyone claims it's the cleverest comedy drama made locally." Well, it was the only one made locally, but. And then Stampede, again, was filmed in Wyalusing and produced by Bill Keller, in the 1950s. The movie had a cast of local residents also and was filmed in Wyalusing, and this scene was filmed in the Wyalusing Hotel. And we have a copy of A Son of the Hills? No. Towanda, Queens. Thank you. Towanda, Queens. Yeah, we don't know of any copies of the other films, especially the silent films. The one we have? Yeah, we have it on DVD as well as a reel, but we have a DVD. Yeah. One day we're going to have a party upstairs with popcorn and watch it. So then, our local people. The first one I'm going to start with is Eleanor Woodruff. Eleanor Woodruff was born in Towanda on September 12, 1891, and lived at a house at 105 Chestnut Street. That's where her family resided when she was born and grew up. Eleanor made her debut on stage in 1911, followed by her first appearance in silent films in 1913. Eleanor appeared in 36 films, one better remembered being The Perils of Pauline. Eleanor left the movies for the stage again in 1916 and appeared in 14 plays and last appeared on stage in 1931, after which she married a gentleman named Dorsey Richardson, a banker, and later he became a financial advisor to both Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. And she was quite the upscale individual in the New York City area. I found newspaper clippings of her doing many, many things that had nothing to do with the film industry or stage industry, but she was well known. Carlisle Blackwell. Carlisle Blackwell was born on January 20th, 1884 in Troy and appeared in 180 films from 1910 to 1930. When what happened about 1930? Talkie films. He wasn't carried over into the talkie film industry. Now, I couldn't find any documentation as to why, but we know their voice, their looks and whatnot had some things to do with that. Carlisle was also a producer and writer and has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Carlisle's film debut was in Uncle Tom's Cabin. Between 1921 and 1930, Carlisle also appeared in 9 films, including one of his last films playing Sherlock Holmes in The Hound of Baskervilles. And did anybody notice when I showed the popcorn, the physically built popcorn stand, the poster was The Hound of Baskervilles? I just noticed that. Yeah, I just noticed that this morning. I'm like, oh, interesting. During his career, he also directed 7 films and produced 6 other films. Frank Mail. Frank Mail was born in New York City on June 28, 1889, into an acting family and spent his early days in Canton. Frank's grandfather, stage actor Frank Mail, came to Canton in the 1870s and established a summer home that later would be passed down to his grandson. Frank had a successful career in silent and talkie films. Frank appeared in 310 films between 1911 and 1949, including The Postman Always Rings Twice with Lana Turner and John Garfield. After the conclusion of his career, Frank returned to Canton until the deterioration of his family estate was ultimately sold for taxes and torn down. And then we have Harry Davenport. Some of us have heard of Harry before because there's been other presentations done just specifically about him. And his home still stands in Canton on Route 14, just north of Canton, on the left-hand side of the road. There's an old mansion, haunted house kind of looking building. And there's a family that's still, a mother and her son that still live there. But that's the home that Harry Davenport grew up in, basically. Yeah, I'll cover that here in a second. So Harold George Bryant Davenport, born January 19th, 1866 in Boston, Massachusetts, was an American stage and film actor who worked the show business from the age of 5 until his death in 1949. Harry came from a long line of stage actors. His father was thespian Edward Loomis Davenport, and his mother was Fanny Vining Davenport, a British actress. The Davenport family moved to Canton when Harry was 5 years old. Harry spent much of his life in Canton and ultimately acquired the family home where he lived with his wife and children, Kate, Fanny, and Edward, also known as Ned. Harry made his stage debut at the Chestnut Theater in Philadelphia and his Broadway debut in 1890, appearing in numerous plays. After a long Broadway and silent film career, Harry went to Hollywood in the 1930s, where he often played grandfathers, judges, doctors, and ministers. He was 47 when he left the stage to go into silent films. So as you can see, the different roles that he played were older people because he was an older actor. Harry's roles included Dr. Meade in Gone with the Wind and Grandpa in Meet Me in St. Louis. Betty Davis once called Davenport the greatest character actor of all time. Harry was one of the best known and busiest old men in Hollywood. Harry started his film career again in silent movies at the age of 47. He appeared in over 160 films, one of his more popular roles being Dr. Meade in Gone with the Wind, and these are pictures of him in the movie Gone with the Wind. Harry's last film was in Frank Capra's Riding High, which was released after his death in 1949. During his career, Harry also directed 40 films, including A Son of the Hills, which was filmed here in Bradford County. And he died on August 9th, 1949, at the age of 83. And this is a picture of Harry not too much before he passed away. As you can see from the movie posters of films starring Harry, he acted with many famous actors and actresses, including Judy Garland, Betty Grable, Douglas Fairbanks, Ethel Barrymore, Olivia de Havilland, Henry Fonda, Bing Crosby, Cedric Hardwicke, Ronald Reagan, Cary Grant, Shirley Temple, Earl Flynn, Robert Young, Vivian Lee, Clark Gable, and Maureen O'Hara, just to name a few. He was a busy guy. And then we have his son, Ned. Most of his family worked, by the way, in either the stage or the film industry in different capacities. Edward Ned Davenport was born on October 18, 1911, and graduated from Canton High School. Edward was the son of Harry Davenport and had roles in 13 films between 1937 and 1958, including Gone with the Wind, where he played a one-armed Confederate soldier at the bazaar in Atlanta who was collecting donations for the noble cause. Ned also appeared in the TV series Hopalong Cassidy and Chevron Theater. Ned died on December 20th, 1969. And then we have Dirk Davenport Summers. Dirk Wayne Davenport Summers was the grandson of Harry Davenport and the son of stage actress Kate Davenport. Born June 27, 1931, Dirk appears as the young man playing a fife in the scene in the movie where the band is marching the Confederate soldiers out of Atlanta as they evacuated Atlanta. An interesting fact about Dirk, I love doing research, just so you know. I love my job. Posing as 17-year-olds in 1945, Dirk enlisted in the U.S. Navy at the age of 14 to fight in World War II, along with his cousin, John Drew Barrymore, who was 13 years old. Several weeks, they were very tall for their age. That's what I found. Several weeks later, it was discovered the boys were under the minimum enlistment age and were sent home. Dirk went on to become an actor, appearing in 5 movies, a screenwriter, a film producer, and a director. Dirk received 2 Emmy nominations, and I double-checked that, 2 Emmy nominations for writing and producing the 1972 film Survival of Spaceship Earth. Now, why did he get an Emmy if it was a film? I can't figure that out, but I found that on 2 different sources, that he had participated in the writing and the production. Dirk died on September 27th, 2021. And I found a lot of people that I never heard of before in doing my research. One of them being Gregory LaCava. Born George Gregory LaCava in 1892 in Tawana, Pennsylvania, Greg LaCava began his arts career as a cartoonist, animating comic strips for William Randolph Hearst newspapers. LaCava entered films during World War I as an animator and made several animated cartoon silent films. Hired as the editor-in-chief for the International Comic Films Division, LaCava switched to live-action films in the 1920s and began directing films. LaCava gained a reputation as a sure-footed comedy director and equally proficient in other genres as well. LaCava directed 13 silent films and 23 talkie films. LaCava received 2 Academy Award nominations for Best Director in the movie Stage Door and My Man Godfrey. LaCava also directed 8 actors and actresses to Academy Award nominations, being Frank Morgan, The Affairs of Selene, Claudette Colbert, Private Worlds, Andrea Leeds, Stage Door, Marjorie Rambeau, Primrose Path, and William Powell, Carol Lombard, Misha Auer, and Alice Brady in My Man Godfrey. So he was very busy and a very well-known director in Hollywood during his life. And as you can see from these slides, LaCava directed many films, including well-known stars such as Ginger Rogers, Robert Ames, Katharine Hepburn, Robert Montgomery, Ava Gardner, Gene Kelly, and Helen Hayes, again, just to name a few. And LaCava also has a star on the Walk of Hollywood Fame, and he died on March 1st, 1952. And then we have Philip Van Doren Stern, who I never heard of before I started working here. Philip Van Doren Stern was born in Wyalusing. Stern was a historian and author of some 40 works, best known for his books on the Civil War. Stern is most remembered for the short story, The Greatest Gift, he wrote in 1943. He sent 200 copies to friends of his as a Christmas card. Several of his friends encouraged him to publish the story. So in 1944, the book was published. One of those books came to the attention of RKO producer David Hempstead, who showed it to actor Cary Grant, who was interested in playing the lead role. And they purchased the movie rights for $10,000 in April 1944. After several screenwriters worked on adaptations, RKO sold the story in 1945 to Frank Capra's production company, Liberty Films, for the same $10,000. Capra adapted the story into It's a Wonderful Life, starring James Stewart as George Bailey. And who has never seen It's a Wonderful Life? And it's binged on TBS every year on Christmas Eve, I believe. Harry Mayo. Harry Mayo was another person I never heard of before until a relative of his, who I'll mention in a minute, brought him to my attention. Harry Mayo Manny, better known as Harry Mayo, was for 20 years with the American Vitagraph Company in New York City. Harry started as a singer of illustrated songs and worked his way up to playing leads in such productions as Her Newsboy Friend, The Old Musician, The Bargain Fiend, and The Spy. Harry was very acquainted with the owner's employees of Vitagraph. In September 1927, Harry wrote a 14-part series for the Brooklyn Daily Times describing the history of Vitagraph and his experiences with the film company. And Harry was the grandfather of Maggie Frawley and the late Leonard Frawley, Esquire, both of Towanda. He didn't live here, but his grandchildren lived here. And I read all 14 parts of his writings. Very interesting. And then yesterday, I found out about a gentleman named Paul M. Felton. Paul M. Felton was born in Towanda during 1885. He was the son of John B. Felton and Frances Morley Felton. Paul became a well-known cartoon animator and director. At the age of 19, Paul began working for the Lyman Howe Film Company as an artist and musician. During his career, Paul was one of the owners of Bosworth, DeFranz, and Felton Film Company, and then he went to work for Max Fleischer Film Company and ended his career with the Van Buren Film Corporation. So I put a little blurb up there about each of those companies. Paul's cartoon films included Tire Injury, Old Man Tire, WSS Thriftettes, which I researched a little bit, and that was an American propaganda cartoon made in 1918 to raise funds for the American war effort in World War I. One of his better-known films was A Trip Through Filmland, which was, it looks like it was kind of a documentary, and a cartoon, Farm Foolery, which I believe you can watch clips or both of those on the internet. Paul died on March 16th, 1933. And last but not least, many of you may know this already, many of you may not. Ruth Elizabeth Betty Davis was an American actress of film, television, and theater, regarded as one of the greatest actresses in Hollywood history, appearing in over 47 films and short films. Barbara Davis, known as B.D. Hyman, her daughter, is an American author and was the first child born to film star Betty Davis. B.D. and her husband owned a farm outside of Wyalusing from 1976 to 1984. Betty would come usually in the summer for a month, and she would rent all the rooms at the Edgewater Motel on Route 6 in Wyalusing. And motel had like 6 rooms on one side and then an office and 6 rooms on the other side. And she would rent all the rooms and her chauffeur stayed on one side and she stayed on the other side of the motel with no other guests. Every day but Sunday, her chauffeur would drive Betty and BD to either downtown Wyalusing or Towanda, where they could be seen eating at local restaurants and shopping in local retail stores. And I have a friend that has Betty Davis's signature on a credit card, you know, the old credit card machines, on a credit card machine slip from Evans and Chafee. And I'll just tell you really quick that story. She had no idea who Betty Davis was. So Betty and BD walk in the store. They buy almost $2,000 worth of clothing. So Cindy's ringing it all up. She gets to the total, and Betty hands her credit card. So Cindy ran the credit card, packed up all the merchandise they had purchased, and out the door they went. Well, was it Mr. Chafee? Was he the male owner? Whoever, I'm not sure which was Chafee. He ran up to the register as soon as they left the store, scolding Cindy. Don't you know who they were? And she said, I have no idea. Your store policy is if you pay with a credit card, you have to ask for identification. That's why he was mad. So Betty got something out of her purse, handed it to Cindy. She compared it with the credit card, handed the ID back, and ran the credit card. But she was scolded because she didn't know who Betty Davis was. But she somehow ended up with the carbon copy of that credit card slip. So that concludes my stroll down memory lane. And I want to thank Matt, who allowed me to put this presentation together. And this took me a long time, many tweaks, many drafts, lots of research, digging up photographs for the presentation. And also the monogram, which is the publication of the Leroy Heritage Museum. I used one of their publications to get a lot on Harry Davenport. And the Wyalusing Valley Museum provided me some information on the movie Stampede. And there were so many internet sites that I visited, I can't possibly list them all. Because some of them are valuable and reliable, and some of them weren't quite accurate, but I looked at as many as I could. So that wraps up my little dog and pony show. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Any questions that maybe I can answer? No?
In the back of the horse,
Yeah.
does the book touch the ground?
No, they don't. That's why I wish I could show you the video, because they touch the ground in some of the pictures.
But there are times when
Yeah.
none.
Actually, let me get back to that really quick since you asked that question. Yep. We'll get there. History takes so long to go back. There you go. Yeah, wait. This one, yeah. In this picture, right here, you can see all 4 legs. Well, actually, probably in both. Well, no, that one has the rear leg down. All 4 legs are in the air on that particular picture. So Maybridge won the bet because they had made a bet. He said, no, they don't always touch the ground, and his friend said, well, they have to, or they'd fall over. But obviously, they didn't. And I wish I could have shown you that loop, because you can go on the internet, just Google horse in motion, and you can click on that URL loop, and it'll show you. So, another question in the back? Yeah. Yes. It's in Canton. Is it, Matt, is it in the borough or just outside of the borough?
Almost outside.
Yeah, it's pretty close to the line. So if you're in Canton and you go north on Route 14 towards Troy, just before if there's a Canton Township sign on the road, very near that, on the left-hand side of the road, is this big square, almost a flat roof with a widow's peak on top. Yeah, sits on the left. It's very run down. It's very overgrown. The woman who lives there now is like 83, 84 years old with her son, and they don't really have the energy and money to take care of the place. So, no, she's not a descendant, no. Nancy?
I was just gonna add to Betty Davis' story, so, well, she was coming to the Cadillac, for one thing.
Okay,
Yes, but so, she had two, Dee had two sons, who were gonna line them up. And Sarah was after Sullivan back in those olden days, and Dee had animals, so she bring them to Dr. Sullivan, so I got to know her quite
oh,
well.
okay.
But her older son was in a film with Betty Davis, I can't remember the name,
Oh,
but yeah, so he was,
well, I'll have to research that.
yeah, I can't think of it. But she wrote one of those books, too,
Yeah.
Betty Davis.
This was a lot of fun to research because I've always been interested in older movies, not necessarily the silent films, but the early black and white films of the 30s and 40s. So I had a lot of fun with this.
My sister used to do BD's hair.
And BD, by the way, wrote 2 scathing books about being raised by her mother. Yeah.
She didn't even stay in the country, she sold her place and left.
Okay. Okay.
So we about to get drunk and get BD and go bigger ways ago.
Yeah, she was very abusive to her body. Let's just leave it at that. Yes.
On the lantern projector,
Yeah.
what's that chimney effect in the back?
Because it didn't have a light bulb. It had either a flame or early light bulb would produce a lot of heat. So that chimney, a lot of the heat escaped. Now, I didn't research enough to get to the exact, did it have a flame or did it just have a hot bulb? I want to say probably it was just a hot bulb that needed some way for the heat to escape. And when the second floor of the museum's open, we have one. It's not very big, but we have one, so you can see, it looks exactly like this picture I had on the screen. Does it work, Matt?
I think it has a little oil lamp in it, actually. I pulled it out.
Okay.
It's sitting next to it if you go and look at it.
Okay, a little oil lamp. Now, anybody have one of those little slide presentation toy things when you were growing up? I can't remember what it was called. Viewmaster, and they were red, and they had the slides. Well, that was the same thing, just in a modern version for kids to play with. Yeah, I still have mine. And some of the cartoon strips. Yeah, yeah, we always show them on weekends.
Where you put 2 almost images and you put it on and give it to you in a serious 3D.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah, I didn't, some heads are nodding. I didn't have one of those, but,
Mine was somebody in the Kings.
okay.
Older, I'm probably younger than it.
Yeah, okay, okay. Yeah, so technology started, with some interesting things and then just moved to where we are today, and look what we have today. AI is used in how many movies and television shows now, and, the actors stand in front of a green screen and it looks like they're standing on a mountain in the Alps somewhere, but they're actually in a studio. Yeah, we've come a long way in how we portray films and how we make films.
When I was younger, we used to try to figure out how they did the special effects in some of the movies, because,
Uh-huh.
but now they can do anything because they're not actually
Yeah.
doing it.
Does anybody know how old Tom Cruise is? I believe he's 63, and he still does all the stunts in any movie he appears in. All those Mission Impossible movies with all those crazy stunts, he does them. He doesn't use a stuntman. Yeah. He does some things that I would never, you could put a gun to my head and pull the trigger because I wouldn't do it. But yeah, I think that's rather cool that he does all his own stunts. Yeah.
Well, I've been here, I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, but came here and been pestering Tom for 2 days. And he's been, my,
Two.
my great-grandfather lived in Rwanda in 1879 to about 1883, and that's, was involved with some dry goods store. Moved to Duluth, had a dry goods store. And I recently found this out, and I might ask you to help research it. He was the first person, it was a dry goods store, that he would bring from New York fashions, the
Hang on, Fran. And, oh, he was just talking about some of his early ancestors lived here in Towanda in the 1870s, and they were in the dry goods business. And then he moved out to Minnesota, right? Yeah. And he had a bigger, Steve told me earlier today, he had a 5-story dry goods store, and he was just mentioning that he would bring the latest fashions from New York City into his store, and they would film them and show them at the local movie theater as a commercial. And his descendants were Lewis and Sattler, who owned the 2 stores right next to the CNN Bank, coming in this direction, because we found pictures of them today. And of course, now the bank absorbed, at least the Lewis store got absorbed to become the lobby to the bank. But we found pictures of both stores side by side right next to the CNN Bank.
Did you do any research on the Hale Opera House or any of the other
I have started to do that, and I started to put it in here, as well as I thought, well, if I'm going to do Hale's, I got to look at the Sayre Theater, the Canton Theater, the Troy Theater. Everybody had, not everybody, but there were different theaters. And then I realized, yeah, but that's not talking about the stars and the technical part of it. So maybe that's another presentation somewhere down the road. Yeah, because there's a lot of history in all those, and including the Leroy Heritage Museum, which has you call it the ballroom, which showed movies at some point in time. I think maybe you told me that. Live performances, okay. And Matt has now decided to use the ballroom of the Leroy Heritage Museum for presentations similar to Friday Night at the Museums. So ask him any questions about his schedule. Any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Cindy.
It's not a question, but it's about Betty Davis. One of my friends, she didn't know that Betty was in the area. And she was eating her dinner at the, now it's called the Wildfire Grill, but the old Fireplace Restaurant. And she kept looking at her, and I'm like, that lady can't be Betty Davis. That can't be Betty Davis. Oh, I'm not, and she said she got up and walked out the restaurant, and then later, a couple weeks later, she found out it was Betty Davis. She couldn't believe Betty Davis was in Towanda.
Yeah. It would have surprised the heck out of me. And I was working in Towanda starting in 1980, so I might have passed her on the street and never realized who she was. So, yeah. Yep. Anybody else? Okay, so we'll wrap it up right there. Thank you. I don't know. We'll work on that.